Dirt. You can dig it in your yard. You can buy it in a bag. What if your dirt isn't actually dirt, but substrate? What is substrate, and is the wrong substrate going to kill your tropical terrarium? So what the heck is substrate? Why do we call it that? Well, substrate comes from the Latin prefix sub, meaning below, and a version of stratum, meaning layer. So in this case, a below layer. For us, it's the layer on which our animals live and the plants send their roots. All terrarium floors have a slightly different construction, but just like with an onion or with an ogre, the idea of layers is super important. The dirt part of substrate is critical, but there's much more to starting a healthy terrarium than just adding dirt.
Substrates are super variable based on what type of habitat you're making for your animal. We could spend hours and hours of time talking about desert, tropical, burrowing, swampy. So let's focus on the substrate that I use for my tropical animals and the layers that make them up. First is our drainage layer. We use expanded clay balls because we find that they provide the best drainage without any issues of changing the pH or causing negative health effects for our animals. These little clay pebbles are super cool. They're made by heating clay to around 1200 degrees Celsius in a kiln. When the clay gets super hot, makes tons of bubbles and basically explodes like a popcorn piece, taking the shape that you see here. The pebbles are inert, meaning they'll cause no chemical effects on the rest of your substrate layers, and they're a great surface for valuable biological activity.
So the first layer of our tropical terrarium substrate is cared for. What about the one that we know you're here to see? The one that if you don't do it right, can have less than ideal results for your tropical terrarium. This is the dirt part of substrate, and it's a heck of a lot more than just dirt, but it also has some things in common with what you think of as dirt.
When you go into the woods like this and take a big shovel full of soil, you may notice it looks a lot different than the soil you get out of a bag. Let's look even closer. The first thing we see are the bits of leaf litter, twigs, and plants that have fallen on the ground. As this layer breaks down, it starts to compact and become the actual soil, or medium. We also see the microfauna and bugs that help to break down this natural material. What's cool is that these little bugs are the cleanup crew of the natural world and help everything turn into layers of nutrient-rich substrate. They have a huge value in our terrariums too.
When we make substrate for our own terrariums, what we want to do is mimic what we see in the natural world the best that we can. Just think about it. If our animals like that environment in the wild, we know they'll like it if we can recreate it at home. What we try to do is recreate the perfect mix of freshly fallen material, the critters that break it down, and the nutrient-rich, perfectly balanced soil that comes as a result. And that's the hard part. If you give the wrong mixes or the wrong ingredients, you could potentially make it so that your plants won't grow, or worse, you could hurt your animals. Now, Tim showed you an example of beautiful, rich soil straight from the source, but since we live in Pennsylvania, putting the soil that he showed you directly in your terrarium would probably be a terrible idea if you want to keep a tropical species. So how do we make our ideal tropical terrarium substrate? What are the best ingredients?
But first, let's talk a second about sustainability. Anytime we harvest a material from nature, we're potentially damaging the environment that we're ultimately trying to mimic. Obviously, the idea of hurting nature while trying to appreciate nature at home is a bit of a conundrum. So it's important that as you craft your own substrate, we need to focus on sustainable ingredients. The first of our ingredients that goes into a good tropical substrate is sphagnum, also known as sphagnum moss. This is one cool plant. There are more than 380 different species of this stuff around the world, and it's really cool because it can store a ton of water in its cells, up to 20 times its own weight when dry. This is really important for us in making a substrate because we know that tropical plants and animals love humidity and love having lots of water around. But that water isn't healthy if it's just sitting around stagnant. Sphagnum moss both helps to hold humidity and to keep the soil nice and moist. And it wicks the water from areas of high water to areas that may be a bit drier. This stuff does it all. Oh, hey. Well, the next part of our mix is our coconut fiber, commonly known as cocoa coir. This stuff is everywhere, and it's the basis of so many substrate mixes. But what is it? And why are we using this medium specifically? Whenever you see coconuts growing on trees, they don't exactly look like the ones you'd pick up at the grocery store or when you're on vacation. This is because what you see at the store is actually the inner part of the whole coconut. On the tree, it would be surrounded by a whole huge layer of this coarse, hairy stuff we call coir. So why do we use the outer parts of a coconut in a substrate to grow plants? A few awesome reasons. First, it holds water really well, like 10 times its weight in water. Also, it's totally renewable. The coconuts regrow every year, and you don't need to chop the tree down to harvest it. In addition to that, it has excellent chemical properties to act as the actual dirt layer of your substrate mix. A common alternative would be peat, but the problem with peat is that due to a natural cycle that takes thousands of years to create it, when we harvest it from nature, there's no way to replace it. That's not sustainable, that's not cool.
Next up, charcoal. But no, not the briquettes that you use for making a delicious grill-out dinner. And this is a gas grill anyway. The stuff that comes in a bag like this is often highly compressed, usually chemically treated, and it's not the version of pure charcoal that you would want to put in your terrarium. But why would you put charcoal in a terrarium at all? You know how it seems like everything from air filters to toothpaste has activated charcoal in it? That's because it's a naturally sourced way to filter and clean. Natural charcoal, like this, is a really, really cool material. If you put this charcoal under a microscope, you'll see that it has millions of tiny little pores between the atoms of the carbon that it's made up of. What this then does is makes tons and tons, millions and millions of tiny little traps that take contaminants out of whatever you filter through the charcoal. In our terrariums, there will be chemical byproducts of decomposition that don't really add much value to the plants and the substrate critters. This charcoal serves to bind these products and keep them out of the substrate. Now this is all great, but the charcoal can only hold so much before it's full, and that's just one of the many reasons that we'll fill a whole video for why exchanging portions of your substrate regularly is so important for your terrarium's health. So we have the stuff to make the majority of the substrate and the stuff to keep it clean. Perfect. Time to go plant it, right? Wrong. While you have the base parts that hold water and provide a medium for your plants to grow, you're missing the all-important natural part, the stuff that breaks down into super nutrient-rich soil, sticks and leaves and plant matter.
So why do we put bark, little sticks, and leaves mixed into our substrate? Because they're an important part of the nitrogen cycle. As plant matter like sticks, leaves, and bark decay and break down over time, the bacteria that does the breaking down releases nitrogen and other plant nutrients into the soil. One thing that plants absolutely crave, in addition to Brawndo, is nitrogen. If you go to a garden store and look at the main ingredient in almost every fertilizer, you'll see nitrogen. So by providing stuff for our helpful bacteria to eventually break down and create nitrogen, you're turning your terrarium substrate from just dead dirt into a living part of your mini ecosystem.